Faiza Baji was known in her neighborhood for one striking feature: her long, flowing hair. Thick, shiny, and as black as midnight, it cascaded down her back, reaching all the way to her knees. She loved her hair, often leaving it loose, letting it sway with every movement. She would spend hours tending to it, using fragrant oils, her room always filled with the heady scent of jasmine, rose, and sandalwood. People said her hair was like a magnet, drawing attention wherever she went. But nobody suspected that the very thing she loved most, her hair, would one day become a conduit for something dark, ancient, and utterly malevolent. This incident happened shortly after Faiza's wedding. She had married Arshad, a kind and gentle man who adored her. Their early married life was blissful. Faiza was cheerful, radiant, and devoted to her husband. But fate has a way of twisting happiness into horror, and the night that changed Faiza's life forever came unexpectedly, in the form of a wedding she attended as a guest. It was a bright, humid afternoon when Faiza, dressed in a flowing emerald green lehenga, arrived at the wedding of a distant cousin. Her hair flowed behind her like a dark river, glinting under the sunlight. The hall was beautifully decorated with garlands and strings of lights, the air heavy with incense and the aroma of sweets. Faiza's beauty drew the eyes of many, but she was polite and warm, moving gracefully among the guests. At the wedding, she was introduced to the bride, a young woman whose radiant smile barely concealed the turmoil beneath. The bride, it seemed, was possessed. A malevolent entity had taken residence within her, and because of the sacredness of the occasion, it had to leave temporarily. Unknown to anyone, the spirit's gaze fell upon Faiza. There was something about her flowing hair, her energy, her fragrance, that drew the Jinn closer. The spirit, frustrated at being forced to leave its host, latched onto Faiza like a predator, unseen and patient. Faiza, unaware of the danger, spent time near the bride, exchanging gifts and pleasantries. She admired the bride's jewelry, her laughter echoing lightly through the hall. When she returned home that evening, however, something had already begun to change. The first signs were subtle but unmistakable. Her soft, warm eyes now seemed unnaturally red, shimmering like embers in dim light. She moved through the house in silence, her head lowered, her expression distant. Her parents-in-law noticed it immediately. It was as though someone else had entered her body. Later that night, the first truly horrifying incident occurred. Faiza returned from changing her clothes, her hair now tangled and flowing wildly around her like a living thing. She ordered her husband, Arshad, to leave the room. Her voice had deepened, rough and masculine, resonating with a tone that was both commanding and terrifying. "Do not enter here again," she said, and her eyes glowed faintly red in the darkness. Arshad, frozen with fear, stammered, "Faiza, who are you?" Faiza laughed, a deep, unnatural laugh that echoed like a hollow drum. "I am Shams," she said. The name was foreign, ancient, and sinister, and you will obey. Her mother-in-law, witnessing the scene, fainted briefly from shock. She had often warned Faiza to tie her hair, saying it was too long and too powerful, but Faiza had always ignored her. Now, standing in the flickering candlelight, her hair framing her twisted expression, she seemed less human and more something else entirely. The days that followed were even more terrifying. Faiza's personality shifted in alarming ways. She would speak to herself for hours, murmuring strange verses and names that none of the family could understand. Sometimes she would laugh uncontrollably, the sound rising like a chorus of demons in the night. At other times, she would sit perfectly still for hours, her eyes fixed on some invisible point, unmoving except for the slight quiver of her lips. Despite her violent behavior, Faiza remained obsessively attached to her hair. She would comb it for hours, oiling it with exotic fragrances, her fingers trembling with a manic energy. She refused to bathe, ignored chores, and barely ate. Yet when she did eat, she consumed vast amounts of food, yet her body remained gaunt, weakened by the presence of the spirit within. Even her husband's presence became unbearable. He could not approach her without being met with rage, threats, or a chilling silence. The family tried everything. They consulted psychiatrists who could not find a medical explanation. They called spiritual healers, but the possession resisted ordinary rituals. Faiza's condition worsened with every passing day. The house, once warm and vibrant, became a place of tension and dread. At night, strange noises echoed through the hallways, whispers, dragging footsteps, doors opening and closing by themselves. Shadows moved along the walls, and sometimes the faint flickering light of blue flames would appear in the corners of the room. Finally, after weeks of terror, they learned of a renowned Amil in Lucknow, known for his expertise in dealing with malevolent jinn. Arshad, desperate and trembling, traveled to bring the man back. When the Amil arrived, he assessed the situation immediately. He instructed the family to prepare protective circles using sacred powders, verses, and talismans, marking each door and window with symbols of safety and divine protection. The ritual began at night in the largest room of the house. Faiza was restrained with protective cords, though she resisted violently. Her strength seemed unnatural, almost inhuman, as if the entity inside her fed on her fear and the energy of the room. She screamed, weeping, laughing, cursing, sometimes speaking in tongues that chilled everyone present. Her hair, now loose and wild, seemed to move on its own, curling and twisting as if animated by a life separate from her body. The Amil chanted prayers in a deep, resonant voice, calling upon divine protection and authority over the jinn. He performed the ritual meticulously, using incense, water, and sacred words, tracing symbols of power in the air. Faiza's body convulsed, her eyes rolling back, her voice alternating between human tones and deep guttural sounds. At one point, the entity within her attempted to flee, lashing out with a force that shook the room. Lamps toppled, windows rattled, and the floorboards groaned beneath the invisible weight of something ancient and evil. Finally, exhausted, Faiza collapsed. The Amil approached, carrying a large clay pot, specially prepared for containment. With careful words and precise gestures, he bound the jinn within it. The pot was locked, sealed, and prayers were recited over it to ensure the spirit could not escape. Arshad was instructed to carry the pot far from their home, eventually casting it into the sea, where the malevolent presence would no longer harm his wife. In the days that followed, Faiza slowly returned to normal. Her voice softened, her eyes cleared, and the glow of malice vanished. She resumed her daily routines, though the trauma left deep scars. She avoided her hair's natural flowing state, often tying it tightly to avoid attracting attention. But the ordeal had taken a permanent toll. Faiza Baji was never able to conceive children, despite consulting numerous doctors. It was as if the malevolent spirit had left a lingering shadow, a dark mark over her life, a silent reminder of the horrors she had endured. Even after the possession ended, her nights were filled with unease. She would sometimes awake, sensing a presence in the room, catching fleeting glimpses of shadows in her periphery. The sound of dragging feet would echo faintly, just enough to send shivers down her spine. Her husband would reassure her, but the memory of that time was etched permanently into her psyche. The story of Faiza Baji spread quietly among her relatives and neighbors. They spoke in hushed tones of the girl with the long, flowing hair, and the day it became a beacon for darkness. They whispered of the malevolent jinn named Shams who had latched on to her beauty and vitality, and the spiritual practitioner who risked everything to save her. Faiza's hair, once her pride, became a symbol of caution. She never let it flow freely again, fearing the attention it might attract. The memory of that bride, possessed and silent, haunted her as well. The entity had leaped from one body to another in a moment, leaving a trail of terror. Faiza often wondered how close she had come to being lost entirely, swallowed by the darkness that had brushed against her so intimately. Even years later, in the quiet of her room, she could feel it, the presence of something watching, waiting. She would touch her hair, braid it tightly, whisper protective verses under her breath, and pray with renewed fervor. The incident had taught her a lesson about beauty, vanity, and the unseen world, that sometimes what we treasure most may draw forces beyond our understanding, and that the veil between the living and the unseen is thinner than we dared